We're recording.
All right, everyone, it's 7 o'clock, so I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Personnel and Administrative Affairs Committee. And I will ask the clerk to please take the roll.
Alderman at Large Shoshana Kelly, Chairwoman. Alderman at Large Ben Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Tyler Govia.
Here.
Alderman Thomas Lopez.
Here.
And Alderman Derek Tebow is here. We also have with us Mayor Jim Donchis, President Alderwoman at Large Lori Wilshire, and we also have Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran and Alderman John Sullivan.
Okay, thank you. Alderwoman Kelly is unable to attend this evening because she is at home sick. So I am graced with the honor of chairing the committee. First, we're going to start off with public comment. Anyone that wishes to address anything on the agenda, please come forward.
Lori Ortolano, 41 Berkeley Street. I know tonight you have a couple ordinances that you're looking at to change the way public comment is handled for the city, and I'd like to address that. First of all, I'd like to make you aware that there have been 6 changes to public comment or accepting public documents by this administration since 2015, and I think that's a lot of change. In 2015, it was changed that citizens couldn't speak at the first comment regarding items not on the agenda. It used to be open for that. That was eliminated. Then public comment was allowed for 15 minutes. If no one showed up and somebody spoke 15 minutes, they could use the 15 minutes. That was changed and no longer allowed. If only one person shows up, they get 3, even though the time is 15. We currently have legislation in place here tonight to limit what people can say and allows the chair to interrupt them if they're not happy, which is already happening by the chairs of committees. The mayor has proposed legislation that both public comment periods can only be relative to items on the agenda, and I don't think that's listening to your public. Ms. Wilshire and the rest of the board cut Zoom out for citizens, but is paying for the committee members and elected people to have access to Zoom, and the cost of that was portrayed as $11,000, which is minimal given what's going on here. And President Wilshire appears to have stopped allowing public communications in board packets. That's no longer accepted. And I'm unaware that that was a board vote. It's just been eliminated from the agenda. I think this is a lot of changes that are really showing that this board doesn't want to hear from the public. And I really believe that these changes to public comment are happening because of me. I think I'm the one driving those changes, and I think it's unfortunate. I think I had a bad run in the last June at the public hearing, and in July, when at the Human Affairs meeting, I was cut off by Mr. Lopez, and then in the Finance Committee meeting, I was cut off by the mayor. And the mayor, unfortunately, decided to bring up a word he found distasteful that hadn't been uttered or discussed in 12 months. And nobody here on the board bothered to ask why he did that. I now fully believe that he did that so he could introduce this legislation that would now cut public comment because we can't allow these things to be said. I don't know why it wasn't a problem a year ago and why you didn't address it then. But we have had citizens, we have had board members say things that are very unsavory. Vice Chair talked about screwing the pooch in a meeting. Nobody flinched. Patricia Cleave talked about throwing the finger to the court. Nobody flinched. Alderman over here talked about whiny white bitches when she was on the school board. Nobody flinched. Nothing was done. I don't know why the public is penalized when the conduct of the board should be in question as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to give public comment, please come forward.
Good evening, Matthew Guthrow, 104 Fawn Lane. I'm also coming here to speak before you today about the ordinance that you guys are reviewing in your subcommittee concerning ordinance 022-024. I'm not sure how we got here, but it seems kind of silly that you need to create legislation for the presiding officer to enforce the rules of decorum in the aldermanic chamber. Furthermore, I think you're traveling down a slippery slope. When you have vague verbiage in this legislation, like excessive repetition or irrelevant remarks, this ordinance needs to be reworked and better defined, because on its face, it can be used to silence those comments that are in opposition to an item or a person that they may not agree with. Concerning the second ordinance, 022-025, I ask that you reconsider amending Section B, meetings of committees of the Board of Aldermen, including those listed in subsection 5 through 9, to allow public comment at the end of the meeting, not to be restricted to items on the agenda. This seems like another step in eliminating the public from voicing their questions, concerns, or appreciation for what's happening in our city. It started with the elimination of Zoom participation to the public, but not the aldermen or staff. As a matter of fact, it's concerning that staff is only participating in Zoom these days. Then you recently agreed to remove communication from the public in your board agenda packets at your alderman meetings. I'm afraid to ask what the next step is going to be concerning this crusade to eliminate the voice of your tax-paying stakeholders. So I just ask that you guys look at this with common sense and not apply the rules that you want for one person to almost 90,000 taxpayers that you have here in Nashua. I think you need to really take a look at that and see the choices that you're making. I think all of this is an overreach, and I think you guys can easily achieve what you want to do by enforcing some of your rules of decorum at your meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to give public comment this evening? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move on to communications.
There is none.
Interviews.
We have for the Electric Aggregation Committee, a couple, I guess the mayor will come up and speak to it. One is Adrian George, a new appointment, 18 Shingle Mill Drive, Nashua, New Hampshire 03062, and G. Frank Tees, new appointment, 57 Northeastern Boulevard, Nashua, New Hampshire 03062.
All right, so we will take up the Electric Aggregation Committee, and before I turn it over to the mayor, I did want to say I'm going to take the agenda a little bit out of order so that we can do the Electric Aggregation Committee and then go into the other interview, which was tabled for the Cultural Connections Committee. And then we'll get to the ordinances after that. So first is the Electric Aggregation Committee, and I'm going to turn it over to the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I have with me Energy Manager Doria Brown, as well as Mr. George and Mr. Tees. But before I introduce our two nominees, I wanted to briefly update you on what aggregation is for those who maybe are new to the subject, and also kind of the progress that has occurred since we first began looking at this issue some time ago. So the state legislature authorized any community to undertake electric aggregation, as they call it. And what that means is any community, if they follow the procedures set forth in the statute, can undertake to purchase on behalf of all the Eversource, the so-called default carrier, purchase on behalf of their customers the electricity that those customers use. The goals here are to reduce costs for consumers, potentially by millions of dollars in savings for Nashua customers, especially since the rates, the electric rate has jumped now to 22 cents for the portion of the bill that pays for energy costs. Also, it could enable a community to purchase a mix of energy that is different than Eversource's, more green, more sustainable potentially. So the legislature authorized this procedure, and there was quite a bit of delay because the PUC was considering and eventually implementing and adopting regulations that would govern the details of how this would be implemented. Now, I want to thank and compliment our energy manager, Doria Brown, for really digging into this issue and applying like incredible energy and thought and devotion to it over a couple of years. She's done a very good job. And in a year or so ago, we agreed as a city to enter into a compact with 16 other communities to consider a group approach towards the purchase of power, so-called Community Power New Hampshire. And those other communities include Lebanon, Hanover, Exeter, Dover, Cheshire County, absent Keene, and other communities around the state. And so there has been an effort to jointly review and consider this issue. The next step, which we need to take pursuant to the state procedure, is to adopt through the work of an aggregation committee a so-called aggregation plan that would set forth the basic approach as to how this project would be undertaken. There are two possible ways to go. One, we would stay with the group of 17 and jointly do this together. The other would be that we could, as some communities have done, like the city of Keene, undertake our own plan, working with an energy broker and manager such as Freedom Energy of Bedford, New Hampshire. That's the approach that Keene has taken. Both have their advantages and disadvantages. And those are some of the questions we want our aggregation committee to consider. And after the plan is adopted or recommended by the aggregation committee, they will come back to the board for its adoption, and you will, obviously be able to comment and ask questions. But the aggregation plan may not actually dictate which direction we go, and then ultimately we'd have to come back to the Board of Aldermen with a recommendation as to whether to proceed, and if so, how to do that, which of the two basic approaches. Now that's kind of a basic outline. Ms. Brown can fill you in on more of the details. Again, she's been very, very involved. Is in the leadership of the coalition that I spoke about, Community Power New Hampshire. So if you have questions, tonight I will certainly maybe turn those over to Ms. Brown. But now, if it's okay, Mr. Chair, I would go forward and introduce our nominees.
Yes, please do.
But I did want to give you an overview because I know at least Alderman Sullivan was not here, maybe Alderman Tebow were not here when we embarked on this, initially on this aggregation approach. So my first nominee is Adrian George, seated to my left. He's educated in the sciences. He has BS in physics and a master's in atmospheric science and in physics. He's been employed in various very technical roles, but most recently at BAE in various positions. He's a published author, and he recently retired. And I forget where you went to school, but he received a technical education before, a post-secondary education. Oh yes, it tells me right here. He got his BS at Drexel and went to Penn State and Drexel for his 2 master's degrees. He lives down, I believe, in Ward 9, and I will now introduce Mr. George and ask him to say a few words about himself and also to indicate his interest in the issue of electric aggregation.
Please, Mr. George.
Hey, my name is Adrian George. I've been retired for about 2 years. I've been a member of the Environment and Energy Committee since December of last year. So I think it was last May, the manager, Doria Brown, was asking, whether anyone on the committee, would like to volunteer to help her out in the Aggregation Committee, and I volunteered. I think it's just a natural extension. Environment, energy, you're looking at the energy part of what the committee does. I believe I have a broad technical background, so at least, complement the work that's done. And I really look forward to, working with Doria and the mayor going forward. Energy is very important right now, especially with rates going up, so I think this is a very important time to really get involved in this issue.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, do you want to introduce Mr. Tees, and then we'll take questions for both candidates after?
Okay, great. Well, Frank Tees is well known to the community. He's been a lifelong resident. His career is in banking. He's worked at a number of banking institutions, has helped found 2 local banks, the National Bank across the, ultimately got sold, but the one that's up the street on Main Street, and most recently the Milliard Bank. He's been on many boards of directors, including the BG Board of Trustees. There are many. He's in the Rotary Club. He's been on the board of Huntington. He's been on the National Arts Commission, the Big Brothers Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Club. And it was my pleasure to serve with him when he was elected as a member of the Board of Public Works, where he served for 4 years. He's good with numbers and can help us with any kind of economic analysis we need. And he volunteered to help out wherever we needed him, and it seemed like this would be a very good fit for Mr. Tees.
Okay, Mr. Tees?
As Alderman Sullivan can attest, physics was not a strong suit of mine, so I'm glad to have a peer here. A lifelong resident, always was told by my dad and grandfather when asked to help, you help, and the mayor, or Doria, called and said, we might need some help here with numbers, are you interested? And that's my strength. Happy to help if so approved and recommended to the full board and then subsequently approved. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to the committee for any questions or comments. Alderman Lopez?
Yeah, so for Mr. George, I am very impressed by your resume. I mean, who doesn't have a master's degree, but you have published work, so that alone speaks highly to your qualifications and continued reinvestment in the field and recognition by your peers. But I was also particularly interested in all the work you've done for the dental connection. I think recognizing the need for low-income dental care, you were definitely a man before your time, and we're only just starting to recognize all of the good that they've been doing for decades. So I look forward to your contribution on the Aggregation Committee, and I hope that there is this recognition of how we can do green energy, community resource retention, kind of bring back a little bit of local control to things like power. So I appreciate you stepping forward, and Mr. Tees, very familiar with your work in the community. I'm glad you're here for this too, and I think your participation is going to count for a lot.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Alderman Wilshire?
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, both, for stepping up. Mr. Tees, I've known you for a long time, and I know you're a busy guy, so thank you for putting your name in to be nominated this evening. You're very well respected in the community, and I look forward to voting for your nomination. Mr. George, thank you very well as well for stepping up. You seem like a very qualified candidate, and I look forward to your participation as well. Thank you.
Anyone else? Alderman Devo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Same as was what my peers have said. Both you guys have exact the qualifications we need to be on this committee. Being transparent, I work for Eversource in my day job, and I work in the call center as one of the managers, and we are getting many calls on the prices of energy. So I've been telling people to go get other suppliers, which is what we're supposed to tell them, and that's what I did myself. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this committee and seeing what it can do to really help us, because costs are going out of control, and there's got to be a way to bring it down. So I'm looking forward to the work that the committee does, and again, I'll support both of you as well. Thank you.
Alderman Sullivan.
Thank you very much. And while I'm not on this committee, I just wanted to say that I know both of you to a certain degree. One lives in my ward right down the street from me, and I'm very impressed I read your resume before, and I didn't know all that about you. So congratulations on your success, and thank you for serving the city. Mr. Tees, I'm just going to glance over the physics comment, but I do understand where you're coming from. But I understand and appreciate how busy you are, and I appreciate you stepping up to serve the city. So thank you both.
Thank you. Any other comments? I'll just say this kind of be an echo chamber, but I do want to get it on the record. Thank you both for volunteering your time for all that you do in the city, but particularly in this case for this committee. I think this is an important project that, you know, as Alderman Tebow said, energy costs are going up, and so anything that we can do to try to give us cost savings to our residents, I think is a good idea. And we'll see where it goes and see if it can actually work. So, thank you. All right, well, that will conclude the interview for the Electric Aggregation Committee. Thank you, gentlemen, both. We will take up your nomination later on in the meeting. And so I'm going to ask for a motion to go out of order to take up the Cultural Connections Committee. She's here, but is she here
No,
tonight?
but I think Tom can speak to her.
Okay.
If I may clarify, can I make that motion in order to clarify? I would like to
Well,
move.
no,
that we
just go ahead and just let us know what.
Okay, so basically I checked with the Cultural Connections Chair, and I appreciate the board's indulgence in confirming that, because we've had frequent conversations on the Cultural Connections Committee and here about it being such a large board. It's essential that people be regular participants. So because I was reviewing a list of an attendance summary that was sent to me during the meeting, like on the fly, that was not complete, I didn't see Nanyam's name on it, but it was not a complete list. It was a specific number of people that we needed to be looking at to make sure that their appointments weren't filling in spaces that other people might more enthusiastically use. So I talked to the chair. She said 100% we should move forward with that reappointment. And I have myself seen that individual very involved in their festival planning and recent activities.
So if you want to make that motion.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion. Do I have to do it out of order, or can I just take it off the table?
You can just take it off the table.
Okay, I move to remove from the table the nomination for Cultural Connections Committee member. Let me just double check the name so I get it right. Nanyam Eguguono.
Okay.
Apologies, I should probably practice the last name.
Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Is there another motion?
Yep, I'd like to make a motion to confirm the reappointment of Nanyam for Cultural Connections Committee with a term to expire April 30th, 2025.
You all heard the motion. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And that motion carries. And so we will take up, now that we've done that, so that will go to the full Board of Aldermen at this point. And now we will take up the appointments for the Electric Aggregation Committee. Do I have a motion?
Yep.
Alderman Tebow.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the following new appointments to the Electric Aggregation Committee: Adrian George and G. Frank Tees.
Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. And so your appointments will come up at the next Board of Aldermen meeting. Thank you. And let's see.
do, great. If you don't, yeah,
Moving
it's not
on
necessary.
to unfinished business.
There is none.
New business resolutions.
There is none.
New business ordinances.
I'd like to make a motion relative to public comment to recommend final passage.
Okay, so this is for ordinance 022-024, and the motion is to recommend final passage of this. I would just like to first, since I am the sponsor of this, just kind of put the reason why I move this forward. So reading the ordinance, it became clear to me that we needed to do something to add a little bit more teeth to what we can do to stop members of the public who are out of order and saying, quite frankly, vulgarity. And I basically wanted to put it in writing. I truly believe that that power already exists. But I believe in being transparent with the public. And so I think writing it down and saying that the chairman, if somebody is at the podium and is being vulgar, or if we do get back Zoom and they're online and they're being vulgar, the chairman can cut that person off, say your time is up, and we can move on to the next speaker. The bottom line is there's no reason for a member of the public to be vulgar in this chamber, online, or, and this is the worst part, on television. And the problem is that we broadcast over Channel 16, and there are children that watch that. Now, I know you probably think, well, they're not really watching it. Well, they're in the room if their parents are watching it, or their grandparents, or whatever. And if they hear these, vulgar words, we need to have a chairman be able to stop them. And we need the public to understand that, under no uncertain terms is this unacceptable. And so that was the reason why I brought this forward. I think it's fair. I think it's hard to argue against. That's pretty much the change that we're making. I know that in the public comment tonight, there was some other mentions of other things that are in there. Those things have been in there. That's not what we're changing. So the debate tonight is basically on whether or not we're going to allow a chairman be able to stop somebody in their tracks from being vulgar. And that's essentially what this ordinance does. So I'm happy that was my explanation as to why I brought it forward, and I'm happy to entertain any thoughts or comments on that. Alderman Lopez.
So in public comment, it was pointed out that I stopped somebody from making public comment or ended it or whatever. I did not. But I encouraged the public to watch that meeting themselves. It wasn't necessarily a vulgar moment or expletives being laden, though it's my understanding that does happen in other meetings. But as chair, it's in Mason's rule and it's our responsibility to manage a meeting so that it's effective and has reasonable decorum. Mm-hmm. And I take that pretty seriously because we are on TV, and I don't know if some of the other older generations are keeping up, but when you put stuff on the internet, it's not just on broadcasts anymore. That's out there forever. Once something goes out onto YouTube and our meetings are put out there, that's always something you can trace back to, and that reflects our city and our conduct during that meeting. And I don't think it's fair that everybody in the room who's trying to do business and get things done for the city and representing some very important cases, causes, community developments, to be subject to the whims of someone who's going to come and make it about themselves because they can't regulate their own behaviors. Now, it's very rare, in my opinion, that a member of the public makes public comment and can't keep themselves from going out of control. It does happen, and there are occasions where you have to empathize because that person feels that deeply that they can't express it in conventional means. And I recognize that. But I also recognize when it's done routinely and as a shock tactic and as a strategy. And I don't think that's fair for our residents to have to see, because not everybody is in this room to grab the microphone and get their attention. And not everybody is in this room to express their individual truths. Many people are in this room so that we can come up with a way to work together collaboratively, do business that needs to be done. And I think that's recognized by and large. I don't think the average constituent is going to have any struggle at all in meeting the expectations of this ordinance. I don't think it infringes on any reasonable application of rights. And I think it's something that we already do, but as was pointed out by Alderman Clemens, it's stating it more clearly, because not everybody has time to go find Mason's rules and look up like, yes, I'm not supposed to swear in public. And if I am doing that, then the person who's in charge of the meeting does actually have to intervene and redirect. So it does improve the clarification of what the rules of conduct are for those who weren't aware of it. But I think largely everybody is aware of how to conduct themselves in public. And this is just reinforcing their right to do that.
Thank you. Alderman Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One, I don't want to pretend like I'm a saint. I use language, not that particular word that was used that prompted. You beat me to the Corporation Counsel's office, I think, by a few hours to try to get legislation to essentially enshrine this, just like you had mentioned. But, out in the business world, I own my business. I don't have to filter myself. In everyday conversation, I really don't filter myself. Here we're doing the people's work. The people of the city have expectation for us to filter ourselves and what comes through the TV screen or gets streamed online or is here live. And I know a lot of people have said online that what kids are watching this. I've told, and this is a real fact, my kids were watching the night that Mrs. Orlano used the C word. Whether the mayor baited her into it or not, it still got said. And I don't think he actually did that. I don't think he baited anybody. But now my kids are like, is the potty mouth lady gonna be on TV? And I have to explain to them that maybe she will be. But I'm not gonna keep my kids from being proud of their dad and watching these very intriguing committee meetings every night. If a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old want to watch, who am I? But it's also one thing, like if I swear in front of my children, that's my choice as a parent. No one else gets to have that right. I may allow it, that's my decision in the moment, but it's not just me who feels that way. There are many other parents that want to make sure that what their children hear is age appropriate and that they have the ability to parent their kids without having some member of the public intervene on that. If you have a grievance with the mayor, take it up with him. Go down to his office and fling whatever words you want at him. He's a big boy, he can take it. But you're talking about people in public. I know they're politicians' kids, but so what? They're not elected officials. They just want to hear what's being said about, hey, my dad's on TV. What's he gonna say that's funny tonight? Or something along those lines, whatever a kid's gonna interpret. But I don't think this is infringing on anyone's rights. I think it's just allowing the chair to say, knock it off. And I think that's a reasonable thing to do.
Thank you. Alderman GOV.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a clarifying question for you then, a just broad discussion point. So in the ordinance, we're adding in line 10, that's correct?
I have to pull it up, to be honest with you.
If you don't mind, so we'd
Can
be
you
adding in
read it to
that.
me?
So the line 9 would already be there. And
What does line 9 say?
Line 9 would express the repetition and irrelevant remarks are discouraged. So
that was
that's
already
that's
there.
already ordinance. So we're adding in line 10, which is crude, vulgar, profane, and/or obscene remarks are prohibited.
Correct.
Okay, so I have one question about the verbiage being put in. I'm perfectly fine with crude, vulgar, or profane remarks being prohibited. It's just, or the obscene remarks, and what that means to everybody here is probably slightly different. And I'm not sure either. I know for a fact, I don't think anybody in this chamber or on the board now would abuse that power, But looking further down the road, you never know who could be in a chairmanship position where an opinion that isn't theirs is seen as a kind of a remark that would fall in that category in kind of a gray area. It's just kind of as an obscene remark. So I'm perfectly fine with accepting crude, vulgar, or profane remarks. It's just only obscene seems to be very broad to me. And there could be room for somebody down the road to take advantage of that and end up tunneling in a bunch of public comments and just saying they're obscene because they're against what they believe.
I guess could you give without being obscene, could you give an example of what you mean? Because I'm curious.
Yeah, no, so what I could do here is say I was in public comment tonight and I came up and spoke against an ordinance. You could take that as obscene. You could say, well, that's an obscene comment. You could. Who's there to challenge you on it? It's just so broad.
I suppose you could use the same, I understand what you're saying, but you could also, obscene is also a synonym for vulgar too.
Sure.
All of those things are synonyms that are there, and their application, I think, is certainly up to interpretation. But one thing that, in my experience here on the Board of Aldermen, is that when you, and I know it sounds cliche, but when you see something, you know it.
Of course.
And that goes both ways. There have been chairs in the past, there have been presidents of this board in the past who have done exactly what you're saying. And some of them don't last very long because the public doesn't put up with that.
Of course.
So while I may, that could happen, I don't, in my experience, when it does, or I can only think of a couple of instances, and it actually wasn't even at the meeting, it was after or before. You get a very, the public does not react to being talked down to very well. And that's been my experience. And I would think that we're okay with the language that we have in there. So it'd be my preference to leave it, but I certainly understand where you're coming from. I don't know if you have any follow-up on that.
No, don't get me wrong. I totally believe that the public will always prevail in a situation like that. But it could be a year and a half till it prevails. And you would hate to see somebody come in the power and for a year, 2 years, whatever their term might be able to just use that power for whatever they want. I think it could be abused in that sense. So I'll listen around and I'll consider.
Okay. Alderman Tebow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like someone said, this doesn't really change anything. I mean, it was always kind of there. And I think if anything's going out of control, I think the chairperson has the ability to cut something off. I mean, if someone's speaking over their time and they're yelling at us, walking back and forth, they certainly can stop that from happening, whether it's obscene, crude, vulgar, whatever. So I don't think this changes anything, but I think it just, people can call us names without using the words they use. I mean, there's plenty of things they can call us, and they do. I've been called just about everything. But you can do it without using extremely vulgar language. So, and, when it gets to a point when you're calling city workers names like that, I think that's wrong too. They're working for the city. They're not elected officials, I have to take whatever I'm given. That's what it is, right? And I think that's okay. But I think when you're speaking, on air and you're using words like that instead of just calling us the normal losers and whatever you want to call us, it's just not. There's no place for it in the city. There's no place for it in this horseshoe. So, I'll support it. Again, it's not changing anything. The chairperson has the right to do that now. So it's not really, we're not taking anything more away. If you really want to use the C word, go outside, use it all you want, I don't care. But if you cannot use it in here, that would be pleasurable, I guess. Thank you.
Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you, and while I can't vote on this tonight, I will be next week, so I just have clarifying questions, and I'm gonna ask
Sure.
them all at once, if that's okay.
Sure.
My first question is, what happens if we do nothing? The second one is, what's the penalty for violating the ordinance? What outcomes do you want as the author of the legislation? And how many times has this happened?
Sure, so I can answer some of those questions. So, what was, I'm sorry, I have my terrible memory.
I
What
could
was your-
start over. What happens if we do nothing?
So, as I stated before, I don't think that this isn't within the purview of the chairman or the president of the board right now. As was pointed out earlier, I think Mason's gives us broad latitude to basically interpret these types of things. I think the difference here is that we're trying to be transparent with the public. And so I think that gets to some of your questions, some of your other questions, which was, what was the point of this? And the point of this is to just make sure that we're on a level playing field with the public, that, you know, this type of behavior we do not want. The penalty, I think, is being cut off from the microphone that evening. You get a second bite at the apple, sure, at another meeting, but I think being cut off mid-speech or whatever, I think is the penalty. You know, so I don't think it's draconian in the sense that, like, you're banning somebody from ever going up and speaking at the pulpit again. Basically, you'll get your chance again, but, you know, if you're in a heated moment, you need a second to cool down. So I don't know if that answered all of your. So yes, in the past, how many times has it happened? In my experience, it's happened twice. It happened, and I'll just use the two examples that we had to put parental guidance or parental warnings on the broadcasts, and that was once, I want to say it was 2011 or 2010, where a gentleman was, again, using vulgar language. And it happened last July at a finance meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Alderman Moran?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just, a question back to Alderman Govea. Let's
Sure.
say the chairman says you're cut off, that's obscene, they interpret it as obscene. This doesn't change the fact that the body as a whole could overrule the chairman's decision.
That's correct.
So you may have enough people that don't find it obscene, overrule, and let the person continue to speak.
That's correct. The ruling of the chair can always be challenged and overruled. Alderman Devo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make very clear too, I would hope that nobody would ever, no president, chairwoman, chairman, whatever, you know, because they didn't like what they were saying. That's different than the vulgarity part. It's, if they don't agree with it, you know, come in here and somebody's yelling at us about barriers or masks or whatever hot topic, Elm Street, whatever hot topic issue there is, if I don't like that, if I am on the other side of that topic, that's no reason to shut someone down. And that's not what we're trying to do here. I'm fine, I think everybody here is fine with hearing the other side of whatever side we're on. I think it's important, it's important for the city, and I don't think that should ever be shut down. So I just want to make it clear, that's not obscene to me. Hearing another person's viewpoint, even if someone's angry about it, is not obscene, vulgar, crude. It's just their viewpoint. I think as long as they say those points without using the vulgar language, I think it's fine. I think that's the way it should be. So, thank you.
And you know, to that point, I'll say, you know, I'm very proud of the fact that I have listened to debate both from within this horseshoe and outside of the horseshoe, from public comment and people talking, and I've changed my position on various pieces of legislation along the way by listening to the public, by listening to other aldermen. So, you know, I don't think that anybody here is out to, you know, silence a certain opinion on any particular thing. I think we just want people to behave in a manner that's appropriate for television, essentially. That's my opinion. Alderman Govea?
I just have a follow-up for you, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman. So under this ordinance, if you were to get cut off in the first public comment period, you would still be eligible for the second one, correct?
Again, that would be up to the chairman, but I would say yes, and my interpretation would be yes, that
That's
you would
how
be
I
in-
read it too, but just
Yeah.
wanted to clarify on that. Okay.
Yeah.
And reading the warmth of the room, I won't be putting my motion in. We'll leave as is.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? The motion is to recommend final passage. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. Next, we have ordinance 22-025.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend 0 or O-22-025
Okay, motion
relative
is,
to public comment at committee meetings.
motion is to recommend final passage. The mayor is the primary author of this, and I'm going to allow him to introduce it and speak to it.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, that's why I stayed, just in case you wanted to hear my thoughts. So what this does is it simply says that at committee meetings only, the comments have to be germane to the matters on the agenda. And the reasoning, at least that I have, is that committees are usually a small group of people, a subset of the board, and they are tasked with doing specific business. It is a working session. And the public comments at the board meeting, the full board meeting, is open to any subject. But I'm suggesting that at committee meetings where we're trying to focus on doing actual work, some of these meetings take quite a bit of time, we should have the public comment focused upon items that are on the agenda, the business that's being discussed at the time. And, we've seen some situations where these comments go far, far afield. And therefore, I think this improves the, just the operation of the committees and can help us focus on the public's work that needs to be done.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Alderman Govea?
Question through you to the mayor.
Sure.
So this would just be just for committees? This wouldn't be the full board?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Lopez?
So in the instance that was cited in public comment particularly, this, I think, I'm strongly inclined to support because on one side, I don't want the mayor telling us how we're supposed to run our meetings. But on the other hand, we definitely rely on city staff to give us a more informed and detailed input in the committee meetings on purpose because we want to be able to vet issues, we want to be able to explore them without making a Board of Aldermen meeting like a 14-hour marathon, which could happen. Like some of the meetings that we had about outdoor dining, for example, took a lot of like, we're going through the map one step at a time, and this is what would happen if you do that, this or the other thing. And so having the city staff there is extremely helpful, but then using that opportunity to berate them or go off on them or discuss personal opinions of them or observations about their activities that may or may not be substantive or might be hyperbole is not what the meetings are for. The meeting is to talk about the issue, not to, I know there's going to be a public official, or a city staff member there who's kind of obligated there because it's his job to report on certain things and is on the clock and is there in a professional, advisory capacity. But since he's there, I'm going to take all my shots at him. That's not what I sign up for as alderman. I'm not hosting an arena. And I don't think it's in the best interest of us in terms of personnel policy to have people have an open opportunity to just go off on whatever topics they want. Now, that's specifically my issue with members of the public using the opportunity to go after city staff members. I think germane as a term is probably a little wider in meaning than that. My personal preference is that if it were possible to do something like, say, you can't berate city staff when you're using your public comment. You're supposed to be expressing something that is focused on the issues and the topics at hand, not a personality, conflict. I'd love to see that, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to specify that you can't be mean to people because I never imagined you really needed to do that in a law or anything like that. So I'm inclined to support this only because it would be helpful if we could stay on topic and not have people who are presenting on entirely different things that we can't do anything about just because the microphones are on and the camera's rolling. So I'm not 100% sold on this particular legislation, but I am inclined to support it. I'd like to hear more thoughts.
If I could just address quickly the whole berating city employees or certain people, that if we were to put legislation like that forward, it's unconstitutional. And people have the right to come and complain about their public officials. They have the right to, you know, to air their grievances, if you will. But I think where the germane portion of it is, it has to be germane to what is going on in the committee. So if you have an issue with an employee about the way they handled something that we're discussing this evening, well, then you can talk about it. If it's irrelevant to that, then that might not be germane. And so, but you can't tell a person that they can't talk about a public employee because it's unconstitutional to do so. So we have to be able to let people address their grievances, but we don't have to give them carte blanche. We can say your comments have to be directed towards the agenda. And in my personal opinion, I think that I agree with the mayor to a certain extent that at the committee meetings, that the comments should be germane to what the agenda is. I think we are correct also by leaving in the Board of Aldermen at the end of that meeting to have public comment about whatever you want. And I think that's an important piece of our public comment that should stay, because I think it's important to hear from the public about various things or about different things, hear different opinions, hear different ideas, hear about things we never knew maybe were an issue until they came up, or didn't think of something a certain way. So I think at the committee meetings, I think they should be a little bit more directed. So, I was happy to co-sponsor this and support this. Alderman Tebow and then Alderman Wilshire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a tough one for me. I'm on the fence on it. You know, in a perfect world, I think, you know, committee meetings are for committee work and should be committee work only. I get that, with public comment directed towards that. You know, the worst thing is you have a finance meeting and someone's in there talking about masks at the end. It has nothing to do with the meeting you just had. Maybe the right people aren't even in the room. You just have, like you said, you just have the mic and you're gonna yell about stuff. And that to me is not, you know, appropriate for that meeting. It doesn't make real sense to do it there. It's just because there's an open mic. But, you know, at the end of the day, I don't know if I want to take away more chances for public comment. I mean, it would be nice if people could come to some of these meetings, except for the same couple all the time. When we have the big ones and, you know, you get a little bit more, but we have plenty of meetings where no one comes or just one or two people. I would love the public to come to some of these. I'd love for them to maybe say nice things about us once in a while. But it would be nice to see more people out here. And I wish there would be more people out here. So I don't know, changing it for most committee meetings, the ones I sit on, not too many people even come. So I don't know. I might support it tonight, but you know, when it goes to the full board, I got to think about it more and see which side I'm on. But you know, in a perfect world, I think it's good. I just don't think we live in a perfect world. So thank you.
Yeah, Alderman Wilshire.
Thank you. I agree with this legislation, and I agree with it for many reasons. First off, a committee is a working group of the board. They should be able to go in there, do their work without being harassed or yelled at or city staff berated. Enough already. I see nothing wrong with this legislation. If they want to come air that at the full board meetings at the last public comment period, so be it. They have their 3 minutes. If they want to write to us, send us a communication. We're going to get the communication. Just because it's not on the agenda doesn't mean we're not getting it. I agree with this piece of legislation, Mayor, and I thank you for bringing it forward.
Thank you. Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. Question to the mayor through you, please.
Sure.
Clarifying. If there were, you mentioned in the legislation that it has to be germane to the meeting's agenda. And let's just take finance, for example. And if someone couldn't make it to the finance meeting in July, but they came in August and they didn't have a chance to speak, and they wanted to speak to something that happened a month ago or 2 months ago, how does this affect it? Are they cut off? Are they not allowed to say it? I mean, it is, what I mean is, it is, it's relevant to finance, perhaps. It's not on that night's agenda, but it is relevant to the finance committee. What's the call there? How does this legislation handle that?
Well, of course, it's good you asked about finance, because I chair that
I
committee,
know.
so, and you know that, of course. So, I can't answer a hypothetical question. You know, it would depend. I would be chairing the meeting. If it seemed pertinent to the committee's business, I would probably allow it.
Okay.
Anything further, Alderman?
No, thank you.
Alderman Gouveia and then Alderman Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After hearing the debate about the legislation, I just don't think I can get on board with it. I feel the first piece of legislation did enough. It gives you that arm. I feel we shouldn't be taking away a time for public comment. Yes, it is a committee meeting. It is a focused group of the board on a certain subject. But at the same time, I feel we should give the residents as much opportunity to at least speak on how they feel. And they get 3 minutes. It's one of those things where it's not long. If we add 6 minutes onto a meeting, great. I know, as Alderman Tebow said earlier, some of these meetings only have 1 or 2 people at them. There's not a lot. So if it adds on a few minutes at the end of the meeting and somebody could get something off their chest that they want done, I don't see an issue with that.
Okay. Alderman Lopez?
So in my first term as alderman, I had a ward resident who was constantly disputing where his fence was supposed to be with his neighbor. Every single infrastructure meeting he came, every single meeting he basically berated his neighbors. He introduced us to all the historical data he could do. And ultimately that was why no one could really do anything, because he was trying to measure rods from 18 whatever. And there had been boundary changes before he actually bought his house. And it wasn't exactly a civil issue. So he came every single week, or every single committee meeting, and humiliated his neighbors. They hated it. They spoke to me too. They said this, you know, he just gets up and he talked. And conversation with him, he said, well, that's what I do in it's, you know, my way of being involved. And like, he would not sway on that or anything. You know, could you find a better pastime or activity, or you know a lot about history, you want to join a group or something? You're arguing over where your neighbor's driveway is, and we can't really do anything about it because there's no way to prove it. So it was not germane to most of the meetings that he was at. However, as has been stated here, you can't limit free speech when it comes to that kind of thing. And he needed a place to show up and talk about it. This is where my struggle is, because I don't think that ad hominem attacks are germane. I don't think that observations about people's personal activities or private things when there's no substantiation are germane. I think we should be talking about an issue and different aspects of it which would influence effective decision-making in a supportable way. So I'm struggling with the term germane because, again, what I would love to see is some kind of decorum where you're not allowed to just misuse the opportunity for free speech to blast people because you feel like it. And I particularly see that there's a power disparity when it comes to city employees, because they're there for a job. They're not there because they were elected or anything like that. They're asked to provide a service, and they are, but it's kind of like yelling at your waitress for something that they have no control over or whatever, or yelling at them to someone perceived as being their boss in front of them because they're there and they're convenient. So I object deeply to the idea that a person can use a committee meeting which we specifically would need city staff to be at for various presentation purposes, because they know they'll be there. And so if that's not possible to do, I understand, you know, you can't just have a nice world and have people agree to be agreeable. I don't know that germane, as it's presented here, is something that we could effectively agree upon a definition for when it came to different applications of it. Again, the outdoor dining, or even going further back and talking about the legacy playground. The legacy playground was an issue that was essentially about a playground for handicapped individuals and access and whether the city wanted to accept money for it. But everything got brought into that. Leadership Greater Nashua, who was running for mayor, all of that kind of stuff. A lot of that would probably not have been germane. And then again, more recently, when we're talking about parking spaces and all that kind of stuff, some people were focusing more on, I don't want the street to be that wide or to be narrowed. I want it to be nice and wide. And other people were talking about their preferred dining places and whether they would go back or whether they preferred retail. So I struggle with the term germane because I don't know exactly how it could be applied fairly.
Alderman Moran and then Alderman Tebow.
I co-sponsored this, and just hearing the debate, I agree with Alderman President Wilshire and the mayor for bringing it forward. But then I think, Joe Biden made a very good point the other day. Everyone's entitled to be an idiot. And I think, obviously he was also the best president in the last 6 years. But I think when you have folks that come up here, gotcha, John, that, the public also needs to see that there is a negative side of hampering government, hampering the good work that the people are doing. Are the workers of the city need to be berated like that? No, they don't. This is a very well-run city. It's been very well-run since, the mayor took over, and it's only getting better. So the more and more people come up here and spew alternative facts, it also helps educate, inform people about how truthful they are, how reliable they are, how maybe they're doing it for their own personal aspects of life. And that could really be a good thing to educate all aspects of everyone who votes.
Alderman Tebow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I get two things here. One, so we're limiting it to, the ordinance is limiting it to things on the agenda. My thought is, why wouldn't we limit it to things based on the committee? So if, you're in infrastructure and someone has an infrastructure comment to make, despite it not being on the agenda, why couldn't they speak about the infrastructure? As opposed to speaking about masks that have nothing to do with infrastructure, right? Why couldn't it be kind of a committee type thing? The other thing is, what makes us different from the planning board or zoning boards, where they don't hear someone just randomly talking about masks per se. They just, speak about the stuff that's on the agenda. It's a working committee and they get the job done, and sometimes it's late, but there, a lot of questions, a lot of back and forth, especially on the planning board, probably on the zoning board too. So what makes us different from them? So I don't know, those are either questions or rhetorical questions for anybody who wants to answer them, I guess, if anybody.
Mayor, I am wondering what your thought is on having this change it slightly to what Alderman Tebow just suggested, which would be to have the first public comment meeting at the first public comment period at the committee meeting be germane only to the agenda as this states.
Well,
And the second one be germane to business that the committee oversees.
that sounds good to me. Now, the ordinance does say already in the first comment period, germane to the agenda, and Alderman Tebow is suggesting germane to the committee's business. That, I think, incorporates Alderman Sullivan's question, which was, what if someone wanted to speak about something that happened a month before, something like that? Alderman Tebow's suggestion would include that then, which, as I already said, given that example, if I were sitting as the chair and someone said, well, could I talk about, the agenda of such and such, I probably would say, well, that, it's good enough, So probably, so I think in the end, I think Alderman Tebow's suggestion is a good one.
So, hearing that, do you have an amendment?
Yeah, I'd like to make an amendment to, relative to public comment, O-22-024, to add on the piece about the second.
25.
Oh, sorry, 25.
Yep.
Relative to public comment at committee meetings, the second part of that to add, the second public comment to be germane to the committee itself.
Okay. So what we are voting on, so what is before us here is essentially saying that at the committee meetings, the first public comment period will be germane to that agenda. And at the second portion of that, you can talk to things that are germane to what that committee oversees. And that's the amendment. Is there a discussion on that amendment? I will just say that I think it's a good compromise. I think I think it addresses what Alderman Sullivan brought up, which is particularly unique to the Finance Committee in that there is some agenda items there that don't go, in fact, the majority of them don't go to the Board of Aldermen. They either get passed that evening and they're done, or if they get tabled or whatever, they're, I guess they would be on the next agenda anyway, but so there really is no redress for that committee for some particular items if, in the example that you laid out, if a person couldn't make that meeting, the way that the ordinance was, they wouldn't have been able to address that. This amendment takes care of that. So I certainly will support this amendment. Alderman Tebow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to say too that the people that are going to maybe a finance meeting or going to one of this type of meeting or public health affairs meeting, one of those, they're going for the topic, not only on the agenda, but they care about the stuff that is in that committee. So, this way they can come and they can ask their questions about things that are going on within that. And I know some committees tend to be very wide open, like finance. You could probably, squeeze a lot of things into finance just because, everything's money related. But there's some that are very specific. Ours today, this one's very specific. So, so I hope it's a good compromise. I hope, hope it makes sense to everyone. So.
Further comments? All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and that motion carries. Now we have O-22, O-25 as amended to recommend final passage. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
And that motion carries. We've taken care of what was tabled in committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we will move on to public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to address the committee?
Lori Ortolano, 41 Berkeley Street. A couple of things. I'm really concerned what I heard Alderman Moran say tonight. He mentioned, and I wish the mayor hadn't walked out because I'd look right at him and ask him the questions, that if you have a concern, take it up with the mayor. The mayor has never been willing to address me since 2018. When I tried to reach out to him with my property assessment issues, he wouldn't meet with me. He has never accepted any level of communication from the very beginning. And I know the Nashville Police Department always said to me, we don't understand why he didn't do that, why he didn't just try to address you. In 2021, I had an alderman ask me to come to a meeting at the mayor's office to discuss TIFs in the Arts Center. I was really interested in it. And they said, come along, I'm having a meeting with the mayor. When I got to the door, I was told I couldn't enter. I was told by the alderman that the mayor viewed me as a liar and I wouldn't be given entry to his office. I've never been in the mayor's office. So that doesn't exist for some of us. I also found your remarks that saying that this is a very well-run city, and since the mayor's taken over, it's very well-run. You get to have that opinion. But then you said, and you referred to the public as the public spewing alternate facts. What a disrespectful way to speak to the public. We don't necessarily spew alternate facts. We have an opinion that's different than yours. And certainly my opinion is based on some level of experience or participation. I've never gotten to talk to the mayor. I bet you have quite a bit more than I have. I'd like to know from the mayor in the finance meeting why he brought up the C word. Why did he even go there? I'd like to know from the mayor why he said pie hole is a swear word. I didn't even know it was. Is that going to be one of the vulgar terms that can't be said? I'd like to know in the finance committee meeting when I went through a significant number of issues that I was concerned about with Tim Cummings, his door never being open, him being overscheduled, him not having records available, finding him to be very arrogant. He was at a meeting presenting information on finance. He has a lot, this guy manages $100 million of money. I was cut off sharply and told we're not going to listen to these scurrilous remarks out of you. Well, why not? And then the mayor took over my public comment for 2 minutes. He would not give me the floor back until Alex Como said, time's up. And I had to sit down. Why did I lose
30
2
seconds.
It's not right. And so I think a lot of what's gone on here today has been targeted to me. I have asked this board to go into non-public session and the chairwoman to go into non-public session when you discuss issues about me. In 4 years, you've never been able to do it. Not once. I've listened to myself spoken about bankrupting the city, costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, being vindictive and retaliated, impersonating a city employee. All this has been done in the public arena.
Time.
I don't get the courtesy that I think I deserve.
Anyone else wishing to speak?
Matthew Guthrow, 104 Fawn Lane. I want to thank this board for being so open to compromise with some of these ordinances. I want to thank Alderman Tebow and Alderman Sullivan for your perspective on this. I think that's what I was trying to relate up here, that if someone has to come up here that has something germane, according to the ordinance, it can't be heard. And I know the mayor sat there and told everyone, you know, I would give it some latitude, I would allow it. But if you're gonna create legislation, you need to stick by it. And so I appreciate that. Since I won't be here for your Board of Aldermen meeting, I'll be away on a business trip. I wanna, hopefully we can carry this wave of compromise carry this into this chamber when we pass this, or it comes up for approval on this Board of Aldermen. Just looking at, what you guys have on your docket. You have the Board of Aldermen meeting, you have 9 specialty committees of the Board of Aldermen, you have over 30 special liaison and ex officio committee meetings. And I think some of the legislation you are creating has to do with one incident. And I think that incident is the outlier and not the norm. And so I think moving forward, I think we probably need to be more diligent about how the meeting is enforced in terms of the rules of decorum versus creating barriers to prevent the public from coming up here and voicing their opinions and concerns. We're looking to make these changes, and they impact, almost 90,000 people in the city. So I appreciate you guys and this entire board looking at this as a whole and looking at what's best for our city in terms of the compromises. And I hope that the spirit of compromise continues. And, I had a conversation at the police commission meeting with the president explaining, why I enjoy Zoom and how Zoom could be run a lot better at your meetings. And I think you guys should bring Zoom back because it really helps bring those people that can't come to your meetings all the time. You know what? Maybe Zoom isn't great for your committee meetings, As you said, you have a small group, you're focused on a certain topic, but if you have something as broad as a Board of Aldermen meeting, maybe that's something you should look at in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else in the public. So I'm gonna move on to general discussion. Any general discussion? Alderman Lopez?
No, not discussion, just comment, sorry.
That's okay, no, go ahead. We'll
Well,
kind of mend the general discussion and the remarks right now.
a couple weeks ago, we had a pretty embarrassing Friday night where members of a white supremacy group were marching on Main Street, claiming to be representing a woman who had been brutally murdered on Kenzie Street. I and many members of the community knew her, and I had been working with the family and law enforcement, having reported information that we were aware of, or directing people who had any information to Nashua PD to facilitate their investigation. And so nobody really knew where this was coming from, other than they show up every now and then. They try to graffiti things or tag things. They're not particularly a welcome member of our community, and maybe they were just looking for relevance. In the intermediate time, in cooperation with the family of Julie, we were able to fundraise very quickly for a seat to be donated into her memory at the Performing Arts Center. Because knowing Julie, she was a performer, and she was very enthusiastic about the Performing Arts Center and the way that it could potentially elevate performing arts as she knew them and presented them. So it was inspiring for me, the number of small donations that happened. There were a lot of like $10 and $20 donations because it was what people had. There's a lot of people who wanted to do something positive to honor her. And so I thank the members of the public that are focused on her and her legacy and honoring her. And I thank members of law enforcement who are the ones who are going to see justice done for her.
Thank you, Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple things. To Alderman Lopez's point, yeah, I don't care how anybody feels about any issue, having that kind of protest up there was just nasty, and it doesn't do any good for anyone. And you're right, the Nashua Police Department will bring justice in the court systems. I just also wanted to send my best wishes to President Wilshire, whose mother passed away last week, and my thoughts and prayers are with you and your family. It's always tough to lose a parent. So, and the last thing I want to bring up, I think it totally, with what Alderman Lopez said, I think it went totally out of my head. Oh yeah, okay, I brought it up earlier and I just wanted to make it clear because I know we got hundreds of thousands of people watching this video right now, and will at some point. Electricity rates have gone up. I've mentioned it before. Go get another supplier. Eversource is 22 cents per kilowatt hour. I got mine last week. I saw my first bill and I said, okay, it really is going up. And I went and I got Direct Energy for 16 cents. It's not 11 cents, which is what it was, but it's a lot better than 22 cents. And this is not speaking out of turn. Eversource is sending their people to go look up suppliers. There's other ones. Direct Energy is not the only one. So go on the PUC website. You can call Eversource. You're going to be waiting a while, but and find another supplier. And make sure you get one that doesn't, it will lock you in, but get one that there's no cancellation fee. So that in January, if the rates do go down, or another supplier has lower rates, you can break that contract and go with someone else. It's critical because it's a 112% jump in electric costs. And Eversource is not getting, I mean, I'm sure they're getting profit somehow, but that is a pass-through. So they're not directly getting profits out of that. So they're sending people to other suppliers. So please, whoever's listening, go. I hear everybody, saying how high the rates are on social media. That would be the first thing I would do is go look for another supplier and complain it went up 5% instead of, or 5 cents instead of, 10, 11, 12 cents. So thank you.
Alderman Wilshire?
Toward that, hoping that the Electric Aggregation Committee can come up with a plan so that we can get a supplier, that we can buy bigger blocks of energy and help everyone's rates.
Anyone else? Alderman Gouveia?
State primaries next week. Get out and vote.
You probably could have mentioned that, sorry.
Anyone else? Alderman Moran?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank Mr. Guthrow. Every time you come up here, whether it's on Zoom or in, I think this is the first time I've seen you here in public, but very cordial, very direct, very crafted with his words. And this is the type of conversation where I may agree or disagree with him here and there, but that's the type of person you can go have a beer with afterwards. And that's what we need to get pushing forward, to be more cordial with one another, not just those who agree with us and those who disagree with us. But thank you for being so cordial. I appreciate it.
Anything else? Do I have a motion? Alderman Tebow.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, and that motion carries, and we are adjourned at 8:20 PM.
I don't disagree with you.